If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to two passages, the book of Romans, chapter 11, and then Mark, chapter 9. If you don't have a Bible and you would like one, we now have some pew Bibles, so if you want to stick your hand up, one of the ushers will bring you one, if that is what you would like. And if you don't have a Bible, even if you're embarrassed to put your hand up right now, but you don't have a Bible and you want one, you can just take one. You can just take one. So we bought some pew Bibles just because there's something to the tactile nature of this book, being able to read it. When you're on your phone, when you're looking at your Bible on your phone, you might get a text message and it distracts you or whatever, but you're not going to get any text messages through these paper Bibles, so you can give your full attention to Jesus. So there you go. There's some Bibles. If you're new here, if this is your first time to Heartland or you've just been here a few times and you want to get connected, even if you don't want to get connected, we would like to get connected with you. It's a big part of what it means to be the body of Christ, is that we are connected to one another. We aren't like so many stars in the sky that are just out there, somewhere in space, but somehow God, knows them all, or like so many islands in the middle of an ocean. We're actually more like a web. We're designed to be connected. And so we as a church leadership would love to be able to connect with you if we don't know you, and see how we can serve you, how can we bless you, how can we nurture your faith in Jesus, or help you explore what that means if you don't know Jesus. So if you want to get connected, just out these doors in the lobby, there's an information table and there's a connect card there that you can fill out, or there's you might notice on the seat backs in front of you there's a little QR code. If you want to hit that with your phone, you could fill it out as well. So don't miss an opportunity to do that. By the way, my name is Josh. If you don't know me, some of you might not know me. And if you don't know me, then you won't know that this is my last Sunday here for a while. Yeah, the boo hiss. Now the tomatoes come out. Well, no, tell me how you really feel. So yeah, I'll be back probably once a year at least to preach again. So if you're new and you don't know me, and you might say, "Good riddance, I'm glad that guy's not coming back." I don't know, but I actually had Jack. Were you able to get that slide ready? Yeah. So if you do know me and you weren't at the family meeting on Friday and you want to follow, so here's where I'm going. Our family is moving back to Portland to follow Jesus. And what we think Jesus is saying is go plant a church. And that is something that I would not do on my own. That is incredibly audacious because Portland is known as a graveyard for church plants. Over 90% of them fail, especially in the area that we are going to. We're going to an area that has a positive estimate would be about 0.5% Bible-believing Christians. So there's over 800,000 people in Multnomah County, and probably less than 5,000 of them are in a Bible-believing church on Sunday. So if you want to come with us, like we need church plants. Like there needs to be a whole lot of church plants out there. So that's what we're doing. If you want to follow our family and stay updated on how that's going, QR code right here. There's also my email if you want to email me personally. That QR code will take you to our latest update letter, which also has a link where you can subscribe yourself. And if that's all overly complicated, if you just write down my email and say, "Hey, I'd like to subscribe to the newsletter," then I will happily do that for you. I will subject you to the cuteness of my children, and also our constant need for prayer and finances, because, hey, we thought it through. We're moving into a 2-bedroom duplex with our 4th child on the way. Only crazy people do that, just by the way, and we recognize that. So, but you know what? Only crazy people follow Jesus into these kinds of things. Like Paul was crazy, right? Let's just admit it. The people who really follow Jesus, they do things that look to everyone else like they're crazy. So, anyways, I'm tired of talking about me. Can we go to the Bible now and talk about Jesus? Okay, yeah. You guys are like, yes, finally, good riddance. Boo, hiss, get out of here. Okay, so the book of Mark, chapter 9, set a little bit of the context here. So Jesus has been doing his ministry in Galilee with his disciples, and in chapter 9, one of the most significant events takes place. It's called the Mount of Transfiguration, and this is where Jesus goes up on a mountain, and he takes 3 of his disciples with him, Peter, James, and John. And on this mountain, get this, on this mountain, God the Father peels back the veil that's covering Jesus' like actual glory as the Son of God, as the second member of the Trinity. The Father peels back that glory just for a moment, and it's so blinding and awesome that all 3 of those disciples just hit the deck, and they're like, they don't know what to do or what to say. So Peter ends up saying like, hey, can we build a temple for you? So Elijah and Moses show up too somehow, and Peter's like, hey, let's never go anywhere. Like, let's make this home. You know, like you stay here, we'll stay here, we're not going anywhere. Like this is the biggest thing that's ever happened to them. They know this is so awesome that there's nowhere else that they would rather be or rather go to. Okay, so that's the Mount of Transfiguration. So that all happens, and then Jesus says, shh, don't tell anybody about this. Don't tell anyone about this. It's not the time yet. So they go back down, Jesus heals, casts a demon out of a boy, and then tells them, hey, he's going to die and be resurrected. They're clueless. They don't get it at all. And then this interesting thing happens. In verse 33, it says this, and this would be all the disciples, they came to Capernaum, which is on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And when Jesus, was in the house, he asked them, what were you discussing on the way? Hey guys, what was the topic of conversation on the way over here? Verse 34, but they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. That's fascinating. You would think after this experience, you would be like, well, Jesus is the greatest. Really, like, no. Whatever the pecking order is on us, like, it doesn't matter because of how great Jesus is. But see how quickly, we can slide out of it, right? They've slid from this awesome experience that Jesus wasn't like, okay, who are the top disciples? I'm going to bring them with me, like the ones who have the greatest potential. No, this was just an act of sheer grace that the Father would let them see this. And somehow this has become a bragging right, It's something to boast over. Verse 35, and he sat them down, called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And he took a child and put him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, okay, so this has got to be a small enough child to take into his arms. We're talking little child, right? Took a little child in his arms, and he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. Now that can be kind of cryptic, or maybe it's like idealizing children in some way. But really, I think the message there is, what does it take? How tough you got to be? How much wherewithal do you have to have? How much skill, like how much impressiveness do you have to receive a child? Nothing. Like you don't have to have anything. In fact, people who are kind of full of themselves, kids have a sense of that kind of thing. They kind of don't want to be around you. But if you're somebody who welcomes children, if you're humble, then children want to come to you. Here's the point behind all of this. Why I'm bringing this up, because where Paul's going in Romans is he's actually seeing, he's been talking about the Jews for a while, and he's actually seeing what the Gentiles are going to end up doing is thinking, well, maybe we got here because we're better. Maybe we got here because there's something inherently wrong with them or inherently right with us. So that's where Paul is going in Romans. So let's go ahead and turn there. This is chapter 11, and we will be in verses 17 to 24. I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then we'll pray, and we'll start unpacking it. So Paul says this in verse 17. But if some of the branches were broken off And you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree. Do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember, it is not you who supports the root, but the root that supports you. Then you will say, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief, but you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud, but stand in awe. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. Note then the kindness and the severity of God. Severity towards those who have fallen, but God's kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in. For God has the power to graft them in again. For if you were cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted, contrary to nature, into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted back into their own olive tree? This is the word of the Lord. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this word. I thank you that you have not been silent and left us here to figure it out. I thank you that you have anticipated what our tendencies will be, to turn away from you, to turn inward on ourselves. And in anticipation of our fallen nature, you have gone ahead and shown us how to come to you, how to continuously recognize that we don't deserve you, that you give what we do not deserve. We need you this morning, as we always need you. We need you to speak a word over us, to create your life in us yet again today, as we need you to every day. So, Lord, what we know not, teach us. What we have not, give us. And what we are not, make us. For Christ's sake. Amen. All right, so we've read the text. Just a little bit of background where we are in Romans. It's been a while. It's been over a year, in Romans. So the first 8 chapters, Paul is really just saying, here's the gospel, and then he double clicks, out pop 8 chapters. And he's just going through the message of the gospel and the implications of the gospel, which is magnificent. And then in chapters 9 through 11, he hits pause, and knowing that he has a Jewish audience, a large Jewish audience there, and he goes, okay, but we need to take a pause here and address a big question. Because if you know your Old Testament, you know that God made promises to the children of Abraham that he would send a redeemer, that he would be their redeemer. And what has happened? Jesus has come, and his people haven't accepted his redemption. So is God faithful to his promises or not? Because if he isn't, that's a big deal. So Paul has spent the last couple of chapters laying out his reasoning for why we can still trust God, even though his people have, for the moment, largely rejected him. And now he's actually turned. He's been talking to the, this part of the audience, and he's like, now you Gentiles, in verse, verse 13. Now I'm speaking to you Gentiles, right? He's like, I'm specifically speaking to this group here. And again, like I had said before, the reason why he's turning to the Gentiles, because what he's really done is explained why it is that the blood descendants of Abraham have not accepted their Messiah. And what the Gentiles might be thinking is, hey, you know what? But he accepted moi. So maybe there's something more to me than there is to them. And this is what he's addressing, this downward slide from grace into law, from grace into moralism, where we attach value to wherever God gives his blessing, We attach value to the object of blessing itself instead of God who's giving the blessing, right? So, he uses a metaphor here. The primary metaphor is that of an olive tree. And I looked a little bit about what he's talking about here. Basically what happens is you have a tree and you cut into it and you can graft a branch from a different species of usually the same type of tree. And what that does is that will add variety. So if you go, I don't know where the nearest Whole Foods is. I don't know if Schnucks has this, but you get those olive bags that have they've got the Kalamata olives and they've got the black olives and they got the green olives and they've got all these other ones. Well, you can have a tree that does that, right? That's the idea, is that you could have a tree that produces different kinds of olives in one tree, right? So that's the metaphor, but here's where the metaphor really breaks down. Notice what Paul said. He says, but if some of the branches were broken off in you, although a wild olive shoot, right? That's where it breaks down, because the difference between a cultivated olive tree and a wild one is kind of like the difference between, we actually have in our house 2 different kinds of frozen blueberries. We have wild ones and then we have the cultivated ones, right? And one thing that you notice about the wild ones is they're nice because they're wild, but they don't taste as good. If we put the wild ones in our oats, it doesn't taste like there's blueberries in there. It just doesn't taste like it at all. And so what Paul is actually getting at, this idea of the wild, is that actually God's tree is more like a Frankenstein tree. He's turning it into a mutant tree by adding stuff that's not supposed to be there. Maybe here's another way of looking at it. So I don't know, this is probably a couple of weeks ago. My wife is pregnant, and so she has these tastes, you might say. She has a hankering for things. And she had a hankering for apple pie. And this is one of those ones where I am rejoicing. But I also said, no, you're not making it, because she didn't want one from Costco or somewhere else. She wanted to make it. And I'm like, that's way too much work. You don't need to be doing that. But my resistance was pretty low, if I'm honest. Especially when she said, hey, I got a couple of pie crusts in the freezer. I can just thaw them out, even though the bulk of the work is the apples, not the crust. Okay. So she gets them out. They thaw out. She spread out the dough, and she's like, hey, come here. Can you smell this? And I think maybe these are bad or something like that. So I smell. She's like, do you smell? Does it smell like butter? I was like, no, it doesn't smell like butter. I was like, it doesn't smell bad. It just doesn't smell like butter. She's like, does it smell like apple pie crust? I was like, no, it smells like pizza pie crust. Because that's what it was. And I was like, so are we going to have apple pizza pie? Is that what we're going to do? Or are we going to get the real? So just to tie up that story, she made the apple pie crust. So here's the analogy though. If the children of Abraham are the apple pie crust, we are the pizza pie crust. And God can take the pizza pie crust and put it in there, but you're not improving the apple pie, right? So that's kind of the idea that he has here, is God can do that. God can do amazing things. But don't think that he was like, man, this is better than the original crust. Let's add some of that in there. No, the Gentiles were not following God's law. They were way away from God. So that's why he gets into this whole thing of hey, don't be boasting as though you should be here. Here's the main thing. If you're taking notes, God gives what we don't deserve. That's really Paul's point in all of this. God gives what we don't deserve. And the pride and the arrogance he's talking about is when you think that you should be there and somebody else should not. It's kind of like maybe another way of saying it. I thought of, maybe let's just say a baseball team. Let's just say the Cardinals. Say their GM says, I'm going to fire a pitcher. He fires the pitcher. He's like, I'm gonna pick somebody out of this Heartland church, and he picks somebody like Tony, who's a Cubs fan. Now let's just say it's just, he might refuse it. Let's say it's somebody else. Let's say it's Alex. He's like, yeah, I'll do it. Now we all know. Alex knows. We all know. he shouldn't be the pitcher of the Cardinals. Like, none of us in this room have what it takes to be the pitcher. But let's just say he gets in training and he's able to actually do it. He might start thinking, well, maybe the GM, like, he saw this inner potential inside of me. And he just wanted to unlock that potential, you know. He saw that I could actually do it, and that's why he picked me. We end up getting that way at some point, you know. And if you don't think you're that way, just think of when you go down, you know, 255, and you get off at 55 where Costco is, and there's always somebody out there with the sign. How often do we think, like, man, if you just made the decisions I made, if you just get a job or whatever, now we're into what Paul is talking about. It's a different realm, but it's the same idea. So, God gives what we don't deserve. We forget that. We end up thinking we do deserve it. But what about this next part where he talks about this? There's actually a warning here, right? He says they were broken off. He says, watch out, because you could be broken off too. In verse 21, if God did not spare the natural branches, neither would he spare you. Now we hear those warnings and we get kind of scared, because what it sounds like Paul is saying is, it's all up to you, right? Like, if you are able, if you're able to hang on, then you'll be okay. But if you let go or if you slip, you're done. You're going to be broken off just like those other branches. So there's this idea that we got to hang on. But how does that square up with other things that Paul says? For example, just a few chapters earlier in chapter 9, where it says, God's the one who's gracious to whom he is gracious, shows mercy to whom he shows mercy, and hardens whomever he hardens. Or even earlier in this passage where he says, it's not the branch that holds on to the root, it's the root that's hanging on to the branch, right? So what do? Is it that God hangs on to us, or is it that we hang on to God? Answer? Yes. There's a tension there, right? There's a tension there. And that tension in the 2,000 years of church history has not been resolved insofar as like, well, is it us hanging on or is it God hanging on? Yes. And there are camps that will prefer the one to the other or the other to the one. But Scripture, it seems like, is actually having a both and kind of mentality towards this. Now, we'll never get it figured out, but just maybe to illustrate, I was a couple of weeks ago, remember when it was really hot a few weeks ago? I'm praying that does not continue, that was the end of it for you guys. But it was really hot last week or a couple of weeks ago. So I took my kids over to Mastodon. Anybody been to the Mastodon Park? So there's a little like wading creek in there. And my little son, Noah, who's 15, 16 months or something like that, he's just got his legs under him, right? So we're going and he's grabbing my finger so that he can walk. But I'm also grabbing his hand, right? It's a flawed picture. It's not a perfect picture, but that's a picture of what we're talking about. Look, I'm grabbing his hand. If I let go, he's not going to stand up. He's going to get swept down the river, right? Like, it's not like his strength is going to keep him without me holding on to him. But at the same time, I want him to hold my finger. I don't want him to just go limp in my arm and I drag him everywhere. So this is how the two, it's an illustration, an imperfect one, of how these two come together. But regardless of all the mystery of how that works, one thing is clear, is that it really isn't about a moral slip-up. Paul hasn't said anything about a moral slip-up, like, oh man, the Jews, they blew it big time and now they're chopped off. You know, maybe they had too many drinks that one night and crashed Dad's car, and now we're cutting them off. It's not like that. Go back to verse, 20. Yeah, that is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief. And then contrast to that, but you stand fast through faith. So what Paul's saying is that it's not up to you to live a morally perfect life. What he means by standing firm and clinging is actually clinging in faith. It's not about your performance, it's actually about the heart. And he also, notice too, the main thing here is arrogance or boasting. That's actually part of the whole package of faith. Because what is faith at its root? At its root, faith is the belief that in my incapacity, but in God's capacity. So for Noah and I'm holding him because I believe that he'll get swept down the river if I don't. But he's holding on to me because he believes also that he will get swept down the river. Unless something bigger than him can support him. And so he reaches out and grabs hold of me in the faith that he will be kept from being swept down the river because I'm bigger than he is. He's exercising faith. Does that make sense? So when he says, cling, stand fast, or being broken off, it has to do with this faith, this posture of our heart, where we actually are small enough to believe that we need God, that we actually need him. Now, what about if you're here and you can sense, like either A, like I have no faith at all. This is all new to me. It's my first time doing something like this. Or I really feel like I don't feel like I have a lot of faith. It's just not there. Or it's not there like it used to be, and I'm lamenting that. Can I just say, based on this passage, take care of this. This is very important. This is probably the most important thing going on in your life right now. If you find your faith slipping, talk to Jesus right now, today. Come talk to me afterwards. There will be people in the back to pray for you. Don't just think this is going to go away. Don't wave it away. Paul's warning is actually serious. So we hold to him in faith, and if you don't have that faith, that's part of why he has a community, right? So that we can uphold one another when our faith is weak and we can encourage one another. God actually works through the whole body, which is why there's really no such thing as a solo Christian. We do have a faith that's personal and our own, but it is not private. And it could be that your faith is faltering because it is too private. So take care of that. And here's one of the reasons why I want to really encourage you to do that. Because you never deserve to be here in the first place. It isn't your faith that makes you deserve to get God's grace. God's grace already goes out to you before you even deserve it. So really it's a matter of receiving and living in what he has given. And that's why he says, continuing in his kindness. God's already showing kindness. So it's really more a matter of receptivity and continuing in his kindness, because he's the God that continues to give what we do not deserve. And if you're wondering, why do you keep on saying that? Let's just keep going. Verse 23 over here, he says, and even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God has the power to graft them in again. We have a big God, y'all. I don't know if you realize that. The other side of death is one thing, but if you're still breathing and you're still living, it isn't too late. God can graft back in. And he has a plan to do it right here. He's talking about the Jewish people, the people who have largely rejected the Messiah. If they stop rejecting him, if they don't continue in unbelief, he'll graft them in again. It's like the apple pie, like if Paul's actually arguing from the lesser to the greater in the next verse there, where he says, if you came from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted contrary to nature into the cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted back into their own olive tree? It's like if God could take these pinches of pizza dough and put them in the pie and somehow transform them so that they turn into really good apple pie crust, right? He transforms them from they're not even the same nature and turns it into that. How much more could God take the pinches of apple pie crust that have been pulled off and put them back in? If God can do this huge thing, why can't he do this little thing? That's the way that Paul is arguing. So, at the end of the day, what do we do with this God who gives us what we do not deserve? The main imperative here, again, I said it over and over, is do not boast, but stand in awe. That's actually what it says. Do not become arrogant, but stand in awe. And here's the interesting thing about pride. Well, let's just talk about it in terms of say the prodigal son. This is one of the greatest illustrations, greatest parables Jesus ever told. If you're not familiar with it, the parable of the prodigal son is a story. Actually, it's a story about two sons and a father. It's also been titled The Waiting Father, which I think is a good title for it too. But there are two sons of the father, an older brother and a younger brother. And the younger brother says to his father, "Give me my share of the inheritance now. I want to go live my life." He's basically saying, I don't care about being your son. I don't want you to be my dad. I just want your stuff so that I can go do what I want. That's some pretty obvious arrogance and pride there. Like, you don't matter. I matter way more than you do. Your stuff matters more than you do. So give it to me. That's pride. So he goes and he blows it, and then there's an economic downturn. He ends up, blowing all his money, and he has to work a really crummy job feeding pigs. And he comes to his senses. He says, well, my father, if I go back to my father, I could work for him and be better off. I can't go back as a son. I'll come back as a worker and I'll be better off. So he comes home and he tells his dad that, and his dad says, kill the fattened calf, put a ring on his finger, put clothes on him. My son is back. He says, I'm not taking you back as a servant. I'm taking you back as a son. And then the older brother, when he hears the celebration, the one who never left, who never did any of that bad stuff to his dad, won't even come in and celebrate. Why? Because he was faithful and the younger brother was not, and his dad didn't give him what he wanted, which is another more subtle form of pride. He's also proud. And many of us can relate to that younger brother's story. Maybe you had your running, you're shaking your fist and you're running from God, or maybe you never knew God, and then one day you woke up, came to your senses, and came to God, and you knew, man, I've been sleeping with the pigs. I'm done with this. I'm going to go somewhere where someone can help me. And God helps you. You have a really big God, and you have a really small you. And when he floods this grace on you, you're like, dang, I don't deserve this. Of course I don't deserve this. And he gives you what you don't deserve. And then you start to, your life starts cleaning up a little bit. You start bearing fruit. Your life starts to change. And at first you're like, that's amazing. That shouldn't be coming out of me, because I was just sleeping with the pigs. But then years go by, and you keep bearing fruit, and you get further and further from that pig trough. And then you start to see more fruit, and you go, well, of course, that's what I'm used to seeing coming out of me. And now you're the older brother. Pride isn't just in the shaking fist rebellion. Pride is in staying around too, just as much. If you don't think you need as much grace as other people, you might have pride in your heart. Or here's a question to ask yourself. How do you handle other people's immaturity? Are you gracious and compassionate with them, knowing that that's you? How do you handle your own failing, right? When you have a failing, is it this colossal event like the tower just, or is it yeah, of course, if I get my eyes off of Jesus, what else am I going to do but stumble? Pride sneaks in these ways. Here's another way it sneaks in, but it's not called pride. This is something I've thought a lot and said a little, but probably should say more. But, we live in a time and place where there are atheists, people who say they don't believe in God. But when you get out on the road, there are no atheists. Everybody says, there is a God, and I am he or she. Right? Because that person's going too fast, they're going too slow, that light's taking too long, you're not changing lanes with a blinker on, you're not giving me my space. Everyone thinks, I am God, get out of my way, right? That's called entitlement. I'm entitled to my space. I'm entitled to a seamless traveling, or for me, a big one too is Why does somebody fix these roads? What are the tax dollars going to, Busting up my car over these roads, It's all entitlement. I think that I deserve better. I think that I should have whatever it is. Or here's another one. By the way, all these things I'm saying, nobody sent me your mail and told me to say this. This is just the Lord working on my heart because I'm like chief of sinners at these things. I drive too fast. I'll just say that. I drive too fast. How do you do with being interrupted by other people? I'm horrible. I'm like the chief of sinners. I'm perfectly happy to interrupt someone else, but if someone interrupts me in conversation, I'm upset. Or if I'm in the middle of my thoughts and somebody interrupts me, how dare you interrupt my thoughts, And it isn't just interrupting, it's like maybe you really, really like to have a quiet house. And so that's why you don't have people over. You don't have neighbors over because their kids are messy and loud. Or why you don't talk to your neighbors because their dog gets up at 3 a.m. and starts barking at nothing. Right? Or maybe that's why we don't really engage in God's mission because we have a mission. And we hope that maybe, as a side here, tangentially, it'll overlap with God's mission, but really, I got to go get to the store so I can get dinner. We're not thinking about the other people on the road. We're not thinking about the other people in the line or at the store or God's mission to them as we're doing that. If we're not on God's mission, that's pride because what we're really saying is my mission is more important than his, right? There's nobody who's not on a mission. Even the guy who's playing video games all day and everybody says get a life, get a girlfriend, whatever. Like they're on a mission. I'm going to save the world. I remember, I was like. I didn't say, hey, let's go play Halo. I said, let's save the universe, And the people who know what Halo is are all smiling and nodding. Because that's how you save the universe from the alien covenant invasion or whatever. Yeah. See, some people know what I'm talking about. At root, what it is I'm more important than God. Like my agenda, I am more important than God. Like it's boasting before God. It's pride. And the Lord's really convicted my heart about, like, as I examine and look deeper into ways in which, if you walk around and see me, you're not like, there goes pride incarnate, or whatever. And because we're looking at people who are cocky. Like, cockiness and pride are not the same thing, right? Like, usually cockiness is, but there's all kinds of pride that's super subtle under the surface. And that's what I'm talking about, because most of us live there. So, what do? Do not be proud, but stand in awe. These two things, they're like a teeter-totter. When one goes down, the other one goes up, right? If as I become smaller, something else has to get bigger. Hopefully that's the Lord. As we stand in awe, as we recognize the grandeur, the greatness of God, our pride has to shrivel down. So how do we do that? You say, okay, stand in awe. That's the solution. Okay, well, that's something that's kind of hard to do really directly, If I was to say, hey, it's easy to stand in awe. The Olympics are going on right now, right? So we stand in awe of like this gymnast or this person who can do some amazing feat that we cannot do. But let's be honest. Not all of the sports are as awe-inspiring as others, right? To each of us, to each their own, right? So for me and for Alex and probably for nobody else, wrestling is the one where we're like, that dude's awesome. I can't believe he did that. But if I was to say to you, hey, go watch the freestyle wrestling in the Olympics and just be in awe, you would probably be like, they look like they're like grabbing hold of each other from time to time. Like I don't get it. Like you can't. What I mean is like you can't by an act of will just be like, I'm in awe. It's actually a disposition in your heart that you can't manufacture. But what you can do is you can attend to the fact that it's there or it is not there, and you can do other things to help. So, for example, all those things I was talking about, how like your neighbors are a nuisance or you run into problems throughout the day on the road or whatever, you could take those little nuisances and you can say, these are problems in this... there's kids present. In this unfortunate world. These are unfortunate incidents that I'm going to use my grit, my wisdom, and wherewithal to just plow through. They're like speed bumps, and it's supposed to slow me down. I'm going to hit the brakes just enough to where I don't destroy my car over the speed bump instead of like actually slowing down. What if instead of them being these speed bumps that we're trying to blast through, what if these are actually ways of God saying, hey, you are small. The world is big. And that's why you have all these issues in the world, is because it's just the arrangement that I've made. I've put little you in a big world, so you'll recognize that you are little and you need a thing that's bigger than the world, me, to be able to overcome the things in the world. Does that make sense? So you take the annoyances and the nuisances and you're supposed to be like, dang, I'm little. I need a big God. God, help me with this. And so that fosters relationship where you actually see that God is bigger. Whereas if I do what is in my flesh I want to do, which is plow through this stinking thing and get it over with as quickly as possible, then what happens? I did it. I got bigger than the world at that moment and didn't need a bigger God. See how this can build up over a whole lifetime of just like muscling through, and you never thought it was pride. But the whole time, like, you had the opportunity to say, I'm small and I have a big God. And your dependence could grow, and he could be big, and you could stand in awe of what God does. Here's another thing that you can do. That's just a very practical one, because God isn't just big because he can solve problems. And God doesn't just deserve awe because he's big, because he's capable. Here's something that I suggest you do, something that I am constantly trying to do, and that is just meditate on the gospel. On what this God, who gives what we do not deserve, has done in Jesus. If we go back to the prodigal son's story, we sometimes can relate to either of those sons, even the younger one who was rebellious. But according to this text, us being Gentiles, we actually are neither of those sons. Because we weren't sons in the first place. We were outsiders. We're strangers. And in fact, we're like strangers who stole the inheritance and went and blew it. And then we come back because we've been sleeping with the pigs. And God has set out a banquet with his family. That's what eternity is described as, like on the other side of the Jordan, when we're with him for eternity. It's described as a banquet with the best food, the best wine, the biggest laughs. And at that table, you and I come in smelling like the pigs that we are, who've actually stolen from God. And he doesn't go, get out of here, get out with the pigs where you belong. You've taken from me. I've already been generous with you, but you just keep taking it. He actually says, hey, welcome. My son and I have decided that he's going to give up his place at the table. He's going to go out with the pigs. See, when Paul talks about the branches being broken off, Jesus is the Israel. He is the branch that was broken off so that we could be grafted in. When we see that Jesus is the one who went out with the pigs so we could get a seat at the table. That's a God we can stand in awe of. That's a God that I can't stop being awed by that God. Because we never deserved it. And Jesus, as it says in Hebrews, he was crucified outside of the camp. He was made an outsider so that we could be brought in. Meditate on the gospel, you guys. Here's the deal. Here's the basic gospel. There is a God, and he is not you. His name is Jesus. And he gives us what we do not deserve. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up as we close. A few things, final thoughts to think about as we have a time of response. You know, some of us have been church so long that the seats have, the cushions have worn into the shape of our butts. And we forget that we're actually helpless. Have you forgotten your helplessness? Have you forgotten how small you are? And I'm not saying this to browbeat anyone. If you have low self-esteem, you might need some help, but it's not your own self-assessment of your value that matters. It's God's value that he places upon you. Have you gotten in touch with your own helplessness lately? Second question. What's one way? Examine your own heart. What's one way, God, that I am making you small? That I'm not letting you be big? Confess that to the Lord. Maybe it's traffic. I'm sure that's low-hanging fruit, I think, for most of us. As somebody who, for me, it's very easy. Just full disclosure, I talk too much. I listen too little. And I interrupt people, and I'm sure it's infuriating. And then I get mad when they interrupt me or talk too much, right? Those are ways in which I make myself big. So God can't be that big for me. Last question. How is Jesus a better God than you? How is the world better because he is king and you are not? I think about how my wife is better because of Jesus. I don't deserve that. We want to not only see that Jesus is king, that he's big, and stand in awe of him. We want that to be the case. We want to be joyful. I want to rejoice in the fact that he is king and I am not. Because it's not just about, guilt and relief. It's not just about doing the right thing. It's about him. So, take those questions with you as we move into a time of response. I'm going to pray for us. Jesus, thank you again. Thank you that you are big and we are not. Thank you that you left your place at the table to go out with the pigs so that we could be clothed in your righteousness and get the ring and be invited into the family when we never had a claim on you to begin with. Fill our hearts with gratitude and awe now at what you have done for us. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.